Hello YouTubers, from Tom and Dana from If This Car Could Talk. Our last 3 videos have focused on the astounding influence that the Willys and Ford built Jeeps during World War II have had on the American culture. If you haven't seen any of the last 3 videos where we prominently feature these legends, go back and check them out. Since being immersed in the car culture for the past 45 years, we can say, without fear of contradiction, that Jeeps hold a mystique unrivaled by any other type or name brand of vehicle. Truly an American creation, people the world over love Jeeps as much as anyone does in this country. This video is dedicated to all of you that keep the Jeep torches burning brightly. Enjoy it and leave a comment, telling us about your Jeep, either currently owned or sadly no longer a part of your life. Now, let's go for a ride. When during the late 1930s, it became evident that the United States would soon be involved in the conflict that was brewing in Europe, the U.S. Army contacted 135 companies to create working prototypes of a 4-wheel drive reconnaissance car. Of those, only 2 companies responded: American Bantam Car Company and Willys Overland. The Army set a seemingly impossible deadline of 49 days to supply a working prototype. Willys asked for more time, but was refused. The Bantam Car Company had only a skeleton staff left on the payroll, and solicited Carl Probst, a talented freelance designer from Detroit, to join the team that was assembled to turn out this prototype vehicle within the allotted time. After turning down Bantam's initial request, Probst responded to an official request from the U.S. Army, and he immediately went to work on July 17, 1940, at first without any salary. Another designer named Harold Christ would later prove to be invaluable for Probst and his team throughout this entire process. After carefully reviewing all of the elements that this prototype needed to have to meet or exceed U.S. Army specifications, Probst laid out full plans for the vehicle in a mere 2 days for the Bantam prototype known as the BRC, or Bantam Reconnaissance Car. He finalized a complete cost estimate the next day. Bantam's bid was submitted to the Army on July 22nd, complete with blueprints. Very impressive when you consider the size of the project and the limited resources of Bantam. Much of the vehicle was designed to use off-the-shelf automotive parts, and any necessary 4-wheel drive drivetrain components were to be supplied by the Spicer Company. The first hand-built prototype was completed at their headquarters in Butler, Pennsylvania, and driven to Camp Holabird, Maryland, on September 23, 1940, for exhaustive Army testing. Amazingly, the vehicle met all of the Army's criteria except required engine torque. In all, American Bantam was able to complete and deliver 2,675 units of their pre-production designs by mid-1941. More than half of the initial production went to the British Army, and some to the Soviet Union, allies of the United States, who were by now involved in the war in Europe for nearly 2 years. Although the Bantam Company produced the most fuel-efficient engines in the automotive industry at that time, those engines did not meet the Army's specifications for horsepower and torque. Bantam also lacked the production capacity to produce these 4-wheel drive vehicles on the scale required by the United States Department of War. Because Willys Overland had a more powerful engine and a capability of mass production unmatched by Bantam, they were able to secure all of the plans for the vehicle from Bantam using their engine design. In 1938, Joseph W. Frazier had joined Willys after a successful career at Chrysler as a chief executive. When the Army needed a working prototype in a short time period, he knew that Willys had some work to do on their current 4-cylinder engine if it was to handle the abuse to which it would be subjected. This objective was brilliantly achieved by ex-Studebaker Chief Mechanical Engineer Delmar Barney Roos, whose goal was an engine that could deliver 15 horsepower at 4,400 RPM and run for 150 hours straight without failure. What he started with was an engine that developed 48 horsepower at 3,400 RPM and could run continuously for only 2 to 4 hours. It took Roos 2 years to perfect his engine. A complex series of revisions that included closer tolerances, tougher and lighter alloys, and other factors reduced the power plant's weight from 57 to 31 pounds. This nearly indestructible engine had a displacement of 134 cubic inches and was known as the Go Devil. It produced 60 horsepower and was of the L-head or flathead design. This little workhorse would be used in all Jeeps made until about 1952. It would power all models of what collectors now refer to as flat fender models, easily identified by their flat hoods and flat fenders as found on World War II production models. Production of this engine would also supply other Willys models with Go Devil power, and it was also used in the two-wheel drive DJ3A until the mid-60s. Many were used as freestanding units to power generators and other support equipment. Even the well-known Henry J compacts were motivated by this engine. An exception was the CJ3B, which is also referred to as a flat hood, but it has a higher box-type flat hood to accommodate the Hurricane engine. The Willys version became the standard Jeep design, designated the Model MB, and was built at their plant in Toledo, Ohio. This led to Willys winning the initial contract to supply these new vehicles for the war effort. By this time, the United States had entered World War II on not only the European front, but the Pacific theater and Africa as well. It was clear that even Willys would not be able to supply all of the vehicles necessary to meet the growing demand of the U.S. government. So they reopened the contract bidding for other auto companies. Ford Motor Company was a favored supplier to the Quartermaster Corps from other previous contracts. They soon won a lucrative contract to also supply these tough, go-anywhere vehicles that would later be credited for helping the Allies win the war. Together, Ford and Willys would build vehicles using the same design elements, so that whichever was out in the field and needed parts, they would effortlessly interchange. Willys would eventually make its first 25,000 or so MB Jeeps with a welded flat iron slat radiator grille. Interestingly, it was Ford who first designed and implemented the now familiar and distinctive stamped vertical slot steel grille into its Jeep vehicles. Ford's design was lighter, used fewer materials, and so it was less costly to produce. Along with many other design features innovated by Ford, this was adopted by Willys and implemented into the standard World War II Jeep by April 1942. In order to be able to get this grille design trademarked, Willys gave their post-war Jeeps a 7-slot grille instead of the original Ford 9-slot design. This applies both to Willys civilian Jeeps as well as the M38 and M38A1 military models. To this day, every Jeep model still uses designs highlighting the 7 recesses in their grilles. Final war production versions built by Willys Overland were designated Model MB, while those built by Ford were the Model GPW. G was a government vehicle, P was 80-inch wheelbase, and W was the Willys engine design. The versions produced by Ford had every component, including bolt heads, marked with an F. And early on, Ford also stamped their name in large letters in their trademark script, embossed in the rear panel of all the models. Willys followed the Ford pattern by stamping Willys into several body parts, but the U.S. government objected to this practice, and both companies soon stopped doing so in 1942. By the conclusion of the war in 1945, the three companies had combined to build 653,568 of these Army-spec'd Jeeps. That accounted for nearly 18% of all domestic wheeled vehicle production for the war. After selling the design to Willys, American Bantam still contributed to the war effort by supplying trailers for these vehicles. Dubbed the T3, they were available for years after the war ended and were found on countless farms and ranches throughout the country. Jeeps were used by every service of the U.S. military for every job you can imagine. They were used as field ambulances, laying cable, fighting fires as pumpers, sawing lumber, plowing fields with appropriate wheels and tires, and running along railroad tracks with specially made wheels. The Army even requested an amphibious Jeep be developed. Designated Model GPA or C Jeep, later known colloquially as a seep. They were never considered a success because most rivers flowed too fast to enter them. As part of the war effort, nearly 30% of the total Jeep production was supplied to the British and Soviet fighting forces. Even though the war was in full swing by 1942, a well-known industrial designer named Brooks Stevens developed an idea on how to make a civilian car called Victory Car on the Jeep chassis. Obviously, it never went into production, but Willys liked the idea, and Brooks Stevens got even more assignments, including the Willys Jeepster station wagons in 1946. The origin of the name Jeep has been debated for many years. Some people believe Jeep is a phonetic pronunciation of the abbreviation GP, from General Purpose, that was used as part of the official Army nomenclature. The first documented use of the word Jeep was the name of a character called Eugene the Jeep in the then popular Popeye comic strip. It was also the name of a small tractor supplied to the U.S. Army by Minneapolis Moline in 1937. A book published in 1942 called Words of the Fighting Forces by Clinton A. Sanders, a dictionary of military slang, defines the Jeep thusly: a four-wheel drive vehicle of 1/2 to 1 1/2 ton capacity for reconnaissance or other Army duties, a term applied to the Bantam cars and occasionally to other motor vehicles in the Air Corps, the Link Trainer, in the Armed Forces, the 1/2 ton command vehicle, also referred to as any small plane, helicopter, or gadget. This definition is also supported by the use of the term Jeep carrier to refer to the Navy's small escort carriers. Early in 1941, Willys Overland capably demonstrated the vehicle's off-road ability by having one driven up the steps of the United States Capitol building. It was skillfully piloted by none other than Willys test driver Irving "Red" Houseman, who had recently heard soldiers at Fort Halliburton, Maryland, calling it a Jeep. When asked by the syndicated columnist Catherine Hillier from the Washington Daily News what it was called, Houseman answered, "It's a Jeep." Catherine Hillier's article was published nationally on February 19, 1941, and included a picture of the vehicle and a caption identifying it as a Jeep. That image and the associated name would become one and the same in the public's eye from then on. Whatever the source, the name stuck, and on February 13, 1943, Willys Overland filed a trademark application on the use of the name Jeep with the U.S. Patent Office. After several denials by the Patent Office and appeals by Willys Overland, the trademark name Jeep was finally awarded to the company on June 13, 1950. The popularity of the Jeep models really took off after the war. Many returning soldiers remembered how simple they were to work on, how rugged they were, and their versatility. The surplus market for them was booming, but eventually the supply would dry up. Willys took notice and soon after the war started offering the new CJ2A model for sale through its dealer network. The CJ stood for Civilian Jeep and did not have some of the features that its battle-equipped counterparts did. To appeal to civilians, some features were added to appeal to buyers, like vacuum-powered windshield wipers, a functional tailgate, a side-mounted spare tire, and civilian lighting. Other amenities like Naugahyde seats, chrome trim, and the availability of a variety of exterior colors also helped sell these Jeeps. Mechanically, a heftier T90 manual transmission replaced the Willys MB and the Ford GPW's T84 in order to appeal to the rural buyer demographic. This would be the world's first mass-produced four-wheel drive vehicle for the civilian market. Originally only marketed to rural customers that ran farms and ranches, they were exactly what was required to handle the plethora of chores needing to be done on a daily basis. My personal opinion is that Willys should have initially widened their potential market for the Jeep by catering to hunters, off-road enthusiasts, and people living in climates requiring four-wheel drive. It wasn't until Ford debuted the Bronco in 1966 that an entirely new marketing campaign would be implemented to get the non-rural customers into showrooms to buy one. They sold extremely well and opened up new markets for personal four-wheel drive vehicles. Even before actual civilian Jeeps had been created, the Life magazine article from January 3, 1944 featured a story titled U.S. Civilians Buy Their First Jeeps. The article profiled a mayor from a small Kansas town who had purchased a Ford GP in Chicago in 1943 and how it performs invaluable work on a daily basis on his 2,000-acre farm. In 1948, the U.S. Federal Trade Commission agreed with American Bantam that the idea of creating the Jeep was solely originated and fully developed by American Bantam in collaboration with the U.S. Army and later with additional development by Ford and Spicer. The FTC forbade Willys from claiming, directly or by implication, that it had created or designed the Jeep, and allowed it only to claim that it contributed to the development of the vehicle. However, the trademark lawsuit initiated and won by Bantam was merely a hollow victory because American Bantam went bankrupt by 1950 and Willys was granted the Jeep trademark that same year. Willys was called upon to supply M38 models for the police action, as it was called, in Korea. Since the war was limited to one country, Willys was easily able to supply the U.S. government with the requested number of Jeeps needed by the U.S. and its allies. Since the original MB design had been improved upon over the years, the Jeeps supplied for Korea would be modified CJ3As. At first, the M38 model, or MC, which was based on the new 1949 CJ3A design. Then in 1953, Willys started building the M38A1, or MD, featuring the rounded hood design to clear the all-new Willys Hurricane engine. This Jeep would later be developed into the CJ5 in 1955. This is why these later Jeeps are known to collectors as round hood, high hood, or raised hood models. The war ended in 1953 and Willys Overland was sold to Kaiser Motors, who promptly changed the new division's name to the Willys Motor Company. In 1954, production of the Kaiser car was consolidated from the old Ford Bomber plant in Willow Run, Michigan, to the Willys plant in Toledo, Ohio. Although Jeep production was steady, sales of the Willys and Kaiser cars continued to fall. Production of various Jeep models continued under this corporate entity known as Kaiser Jeep Corporation until 1963. Flat-fendered Jeeps, as they're now commonly referred to by collectors, were built from the World War II era and then transitioned into civilian models, with the last examples built into the 1960s. The mid-50s was an exciting time in the American auto industry, and customers were expecting more horsepower, more glamorous offerings, and newer high-tech options like power accessories and air conditioning. Kaiser and Willys were only able to cater to buyers of their Jeep models and other basic transportation. Kaiser was also involved in shipbuilding and had immediately formed another company with the previous president of Willys Overland, Joseph W. Frazier. Like many other independent auto companies after World War II, they competed with the Big Three for materials and suppliers, both of which were scarce to find if a company had limited resources. Nash Kelvinator and Hudson Motors merged to form American Motors in 1954, and they would soon acquire the iconic Jeep brand as well. Finally, Kaiser Jeep would then be purchased by American Motors on December 2, 1969. Another era had ended as car companies continued merging and acquiring smaller companies. The 1970 models would be the first year that Jeeps were sold under this new banner. French automaker Renault acquired a major interest in the company, but by the mid-80s was bleeding red ink badly. AMC then was purchased by the Chrysler Corporation on March 9, 1987. Chrysler agreed to buy Renault's share in American Motors, plus all the remaining shares, for about $1.5 billion. This is why Jeep is still part of the Chrysler Group, now owned by Fiat Chrysler Automobiles, or FCA. In 1991, the Willys Overland Jeep MB was designated an International Historic Mechanical Engineering Landmark by the American Society of Mechanical Engineers. They could have selected any of the Jeep models, or any other vehicle for that matter, for this designation, but they chose the original. Jeep's advertising slogan used today says it all. Jeep, there is only one. Other popular slogans over the years are, have fun out there. Only in a Jeep. The sun never sets on the mighty Jeep. If it's not trail rated, it's not a Jeep. And my favorite, the toughest four-letter word on wheels. We really enjoyed bringing this series to you over the past 4 episodes. Many thanks to owners Rich and Tony Tomich for allowing all of us on YouTube to admire their collection of Jeeps, and to Rich for his help with Part 4's technical information. Have you watched all of those videos? Please tell us what you think by leaving a comment. Be sure to like and share this with everyone that would like it, which we suspect is everyone, since everybody we know, car enthusiast or not, loves Jeeps, particularly the vintage ones. Also, if you haven't done it yet, hit that free subscription button so you never miss any of our twice-weekly videos. We appreciate everyone's support and wish everyone a Happy New Year for 2021. Be sure to join us next week when we bring you a low-mileage 1969 Buick Skylark. You won't want to miss it. And remember, please be careful out there.